The climate crisis. A slow-moving crawl of disaster and change, creeping from cell phone video to cell phone video until our skies are red and our homes are flooded. To best it, we first need to understand its origin. Since the Industrial Revolution, humanity has grown increasingly reliant on the burning of fossil fuels to sustain our way of life. Everything from our power generation to our agriculture and daily commutes all result in the release of carbon into the atmosphere. This reliance is proving to be our downfall. The structure of our society depends on the assumed burning of fossil fuels, pitting any action to lower emissions against the entire structure. This effect is the carbon economy. It is our assumption of our reality, one that prevents us from addressing the climate crisis. Because of the carbon economy's widespread influence, individual efforts to lower personal emissions are incredibly difficult. Say you wanted to address, personally, our country's 3 largest sources of emissions.
There's making electricity, there's transportation, and then there's building, sort of all the stuff that goes into running a building. And so, your solutions may not, be the same for each. In the case of making electricity, wind, solar, there's new nuclear that is carbon-free. In the case of cars, it's electric vehicles. In the case of buildings, it's making smarter, more efficient buildings, using them as part of a distributed energy system, a clean distributed energy system.
At the individual level, addressing these sources of emissions would require a radical change in lifestyle. Your home's electricity would have to be solely provided by renewables, the viability of which depend on location. Your food would need to be either locally grown or shipped through renewable-powered electric vehicles, and your heating would have to be carbon neutral as well. These are all expensive propositions. Because of these costs, the initial tag price to live sustainably makes it unattainable for many Americans.
Yeah, I try not to preach, and I try to recognize how much I'm relying on the fossil fuel economy. We all are. By living in this culture, in the society at this time in history, it's extremely difficult to separate from the fossil fuel economy. The shirt I'm wearing and the car I drove and the food I ate this morning, or some of the food I ate this morning, was all brought to me thanks to fossil fuels because of the system that we live in.
Because of these individual barriers, bold, global actions are required in order to address the climate crisis.
Let's start by phasing out fossil fuels. We simply have to stop burning things that are contributing to carbon pollution. Now, that might take some time. We need replacements in terms of how we make energy. Obviously, wind and solar is a real opportunity, and it's getting more cost effective. But making a commitment to be done with fossil fuels, making a commitment to renewables, making a commitment to clean cars, to electric vehicles.
Change on this scale would have widespread consequences. Fossil fuels are so critical to how our society operates that it can be hard to picture a world without them.
I think on a philosophical level, it's inertia. We have become accustomed to fossil fuels as the main driver or bloodline of our economy. So I'm guessing that you drove here today, as did I. And that relied on fossil fuels, on fuels that have been stored for millions of years beneath the surface of the earth, and that we've now pulled to the surface and burn. And fossil fuels are miraculous because they have a lot of energy stored in a very small package. So a gallon of gasoline has an incredible amount of energy. I once did a calculation that if I rode my bike across the country, I would spend roughly the equivalent of 2 to 3 gallons of gas just in the body that I burned. So try to drive your car across the country on 2 to 3 gallons of gas. It's not going to work.
It's possible that the elimination of fossil fuels would be a gradual transition into a similar society, but electrified and powered by renewable energy. It's also possible, however, that fossil fuels are so ingrained in our societal system that a world without them would be fundamentally different from our own. This presents an issue. In order to fight the climate crisis, we need to be able to picture and enact a new way of being and overcome the limitations the carbon economy places on our thinking.
We as humans are tremendously adaptable. we're wise, and we're loving creatures. And we're smart. We can see what the impacts of rampant consumption and dispersal and the effects of our fossil fuel economy are having. And if we have the will and the understanding, we can shift course and start to adapt. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think it involves needing less and something called restraint.
A transition out of the carbon economy is necessary, but it must be done equitably. Completely ending the use of fossil fuels would put many Americans out of work. Policies must be enacted to address their needs.
We should protect those people. I personally believe that they should be paid a living wage for the remainder of what would be their working career and provided a pension. I mean, it is not fair that certain people, again, will bear the burden. But having said that, we do need to address climate change. And so I would be for providing bailouts, for lack of a better word, to individuals who find themselves impacted. I think it is only the fair thing to do. There may be some folks in a community that would prefer maybe be relocated, be given job training opportunities. I mean, you want to be flexible, but I think you also have to remember that it's a lot to ask somebody who's perhaps worked in an industry, it's intergenerational, their father, their mother, their grandfather, their grandmother worked in these industries, to leave their community. And suddenly, go be trained to be something else. I mean, we need to be really respectful of the fact that people made these decisions, and at the time, it seemed like a very practical and wise decision. And we need to be supportive of these communities.
There is an immense amount of work to be done in building the future. Nonprofits like Coalfield Development, based in Appalachia, work to build new economies from the ground up, but without reliance on resources like coal. Job training is also critical to provide individuals with paths to economic stability. The UMass Amherst Clean Energy Extension has one such program, offering an offshore wind certificate. It is intended to increase the access of the people who have been locked out of clean energy.
We're doing that with our offshore wind Clean Energy Certificate, and that's through a scholarship fund that's focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. So folks that might not otherwise have access to the certificate, we offer a full scholarship and professional mentoring and a stipend to help overcome barriers.
In our transition out of fossil fuels, we may also increase our usage of alternative energy sources, such as the burning of trash. These alternative sources could provide opportunities for people in need of new jobs who already have skills in the energy sector.
Certainly there are jobs available to folks in the power industry to come work at waste energy. We're essentially a power plant. We don't burn natural gas or fuel oil or coal, we burn trash. So those licenses I mentioned earlier that apply to pressure vessels and boilers, essentially those folks have an opportunity to come for work at any time. We're always looking for folks with those licenses. They're called fireman's license and so on. So yeah, there's certainly opportunities in the energy industry, the energy part of our business for folks who are in, working at other power plants.
While individual actions run up against the limitations of the carbon economy, people have power if they work together.
Well, I think it starts with consumers, complaining to the store where they buy that massive piece of plastic for a SD card that's about that big, or a camera that you buy, you take off the shelf and it's got a massive, package around it. More environmentally friendly packaging, moving away from plastics into paper, recyclable paper, obviously. All those materials eventually, need to be handled. If they can be recycled, that's great. If they can't be recycled, then a facility like this is an appropriate disposal option.
Together, changes in how we live can have an impact, both on reducing emissions and the nature of our lives.
So a co-housing community is what's called an intentional community. It's people who have decided to live in a relatively small space together and have shared land together, and we grow much of our own food, and we share cars, and we share vehicles, and we share rides, and we share meals. and we'll cook together and eat together. And in that way, we get to know each other and strengthen these social connections.
It's only together, as a community, that people can make change to a greater degree than the sum of their individual actions.
I think we need to think about all renewable energy and facilities such as this and fossil fuel power plants with a realistic eye. My generation was, Clean Air Act, some of the environmental progress has been made. It needs to be taken another step by your generation. And your generation needs to decide, what's appropriate and important to you guys. But in the near term, there needs to be a transition.
Who gets elected matters. So vote for members, vote for candidates who believe that climate change is real, who support the science and who want to do something to address it. If you can't vote, other things you can do is write letters to members of Congress. It does matter. Write letters to senators, to your governor. Get involved with a nonprofit group, perhaps a local environmental group. Get involved in making your school greener. Get involved in making your community greener. It can sometimes seem that a little bit isn't going to make a difference. Every little bit does ultimately matter.